Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game podcast with a destroyed by hay fever host, namely myself, Ben Scallon, and my co host, Jason Osborne. Jason, do you suffer with hay fever at all? Is that a plague that has been bestowed upon you by the Almighty?
Do I what? Well, I'll note initially that I'm not doped up at all this week, so that's already a step in the right direction. But yeah, no, I have absolutely horrendous hay fever as well. Like to the point that genuinely, when the nicest days may as well be I may as well be opening my curtains to a radioactive cloud outside. Like it's that bad.
I was on Benadryl all week to try and hold off the suffering, and mitigate it as much as possible. And then I had to stop taking it as of yesterday because my wife noticed that, like the Liver King, one of my pupils was too big, and you don't like those sort of neurological symptoms. I don't know what time frame you're supposed to be on it for, but apparently I'd exceeded it, so I'm now exposed to hay fever and
You know,
trying to room
I'm
hermetic.
obviously opposed to the idea of like a victim hierarchy or things like that, but that's only because hay fever sufferers haven't been recognized as being at the top of it. Because people who don't have hay fever genuinely have no idea how bad hay fever is. Because as I say, it turns the nicest days into absolute hellscapes. And like, less people think that's an exaggeration. Like, the days you go out and I'll be sneezing and just sneezing and sneezing until I get back in and like douse my head in cold water. And even then, that only pauses it. Like it's unbelievable. But suffice to say, on this podcast, your suffering is recognized, brother.
Yeah, it's classified as a disability, or it should be, because it gets so bad where you're sneezing, snot is coming out of your nose, and you're not even bothering to clean it up because you're just going to sneeze again in 3 seconds. So there's literally no
This,
point. It's just like Sisyphus.
yeah. If anyone ever, if you ever get a high enough profile that you're actually worth assassinating or anything like this, a nice day is probably the time to wait for when everyone else is out enjoying their ice creams and you're bent over the toilet or the sink because you can't stop sneezing.
I thought you were going to say use a pollen gun, which would be kind of a impressive invention. It's funny that I had a friend in school who was from America, and he had like an annihilatory allergy to corn. It would just cause him to have like this terrible reaction. And he came from Indiana, which is just corn as far as the eye can see. And I thought, like, you really were not meant to be born on this planet.
It's like just air dropped in there. He had absolutely no resistance to his environment.
Yeah, no, this Earth was not designed for you, my friend. So, with that
Oh dear.
said, we were going to look at a whole variety of stories, most of them domestic today, which many of our Irish viewers will be happy to hear. We didn't take the bait on Trump and Elon Musk and Epstein and any of these other vicissitudes that are unfolding around the world. We decided we'd stay at home and focus on, first of all, James Brown's comments on the government's housing regulations and how that has actually hindered them, which is a shock to all of us, I'm sure. Then we have the number of pub closures, the fact that the pub industry in Ireland, which we're so well known for globally, is in the toilet. And the fact that the National Treasury Management Agency was scammed out of 5 million euros by some sort of allegedly sophisticated voice scammers. We'll get into it, but it seems like kind of an odd story. Like, I don't know if it was a boomer mistake on their part or they were actually being subjected to a heist by the Mission Impossible team, but we'll get to that down the line. For starters, James Brown, the housing minister, made some very interesting comments last week, Jason, which I wanted to talk to you about, where
Yeah.
he was speaking ahead of the cabinet meeting. This is the housing minister, Fianna Fáil, guy who took over just a couple of months ago. And I asked him what I thought was a good question, not to pat myself. That meme where Obama is giving himself a medal. Like, I
Yeah.
don't want to be doing one of those, but I asked him effectively, what is the biggest barrier to you doing your job that you've found since taking over the job of housing minister? Because he's been in it for a couple of months, and obviously we all have an idea of what the housing problem is and what we would do, and you go into things with a plan. Like, if for some reason I was just randomly appointed to be housing minister tomorrow. I have a vision of what that would be like, but it's not until you're in it that you start to experience certain roadblocks and difficulties, and you go, Janie Mac, I didn't know so and so was this bad. So I asked him, what is he finding most frustrating? And he said that over the last number of years, the government has been bringing in all of these different regulations, which in isolation seem good on paper. So he didn't give this example, but just for the sake of argument, let's say somebody comes up with the bright idea. Every apartment complex has to have a certain amount of toilet facilities per apartment. And you go, sure, that sounds like a great idea. What's wrong with that? So you bring in that. And then suddenly somebody else says, all windows have to have a certain amount of thickness for energy efficiency or whatever it is. And you go, what's wrong with that? And individually on paper, they all seem fine. But when you do 100 of these, suddenly you've set this ridiculously onerous standard that is incredibly difficult to meet, and then houses aren't being built at all. And so he says now his job is to cut back on as much of that regulation as possible, the unnecessary ones, and try to make it simplified so that people can actually be delivering houses the way they're supposed to. But, and I'd love to get your take on this, because I mean, a fair play to him for admitting that, I suppose. That's the first thing, because that is an accurate and brutally honest assessment of the situation. But are they not effectively telling us now that the government's housing strategy is to undo all of their other housing strategies that they've been doing for the last several years? Basically, they've just admitted, yeah, we've been making things worse and ruining everything. And so now our new mission is to counteract what we've done to date. Is that not the message that we're receiving now?
You're far more charitable than I am. I mean, I have the quote here from the his response to the question you asked him, and he said something. He said, "Over the last number of years, we made a lot of decisions that I think were very good in isolation with really good intentions. But when you add them up, what we've actually done is tied ourselves in regulatory knots." Like my initial reaction to that is like, but you're the government. Like, you're not tasked with delivering one initiative, one piece of regulation. It's like these were always going to be taken in combination with all of the other ones. So, like, he says a really good, how did he put it? Very good in isolation with really good intentions. It's like that doesn't matter. You just said nonsense. It's like if you were living in some theoretical universe where you just had to deliver one regulation that was going to make an improvement, well, good for you guys, good work, government. You're after succeeding in that task, but they're not. And the fact that he's after admitting that they put all these regulations out together and now it's strangling home building in the country. I mean, yeah, it's as you say. He's essentially pointing the finger back and saying, well, government has actually been the biggest problem in this. Obviously James Brown is relatively new to the role, but his party isn't. His party and Fine Gael have been in and out of that position over the past 15 years or so. In charge of that position, I should say, for the past 15 years or so. And this is what they have to show for it: a load of red tape that he now needs to go back and cut away because it's hindering them in doing home building. So, yeah, you forgive me if I don't have too favorable an assessment of his answer, but I agree. I'm supposed to be a little more charitable. I agree that it's a much more complicated issue than I think we critics often acknowledge, to put it that way. Like, I was reading only this morning in The Independent about 80 families who were locked out of new homes that are completed, that are absolutely fine, but they were waiting for a link to the power grid. And this article, as it says in the Irish Independent, was detailing how half the country's electricity substations have little or no capacity to connect new housing or other developments. That's according to an analysis of the power network. And that's obviously required before people can move into homes. So, like, there's just so many aspects to this that you have to figure out. It's like, clearly Ireland's electricity infrastructure is inadequate to get people into homes as well. But it's like there's just so many angles to this that it's undoubtedly you're put into the office as the Minister for Housing. I don't know even how you begin to get a grasp on this whole situation, but suffice to say, that's what they're being paid big bucks for. And that's, I mean, some would argue they should be bigger in order to attract more more talent and more competency. But it is tricky. But no, I don't have too much sympathy for the current crowd and government who, as James Brown alluded to, got us into this mess.
Yeah, I mean, his insinuation was, look, in hindsight, it turns out that passing 1,000 regulations a minute for years actually makes it harder to do things, and that's like, sure, who could have known? But here we are, and now lesson learned. We'll move on. But I guarantee you, not I guarantee you, I know for a fact. If I pulled up the Construction Industry Federation website right now, or any other kind of representative body like that, they would have a litany of press releases going back years for each and every one of those regulations that James Brown's government passed, saying, this is going to make it harder to build houses. This is going to make it harder to build houses. Why are you over regulating us? It's going to make it harder to build houses. And then, having been told that at every stage along the way, then at the very end, when it starts to become a major problem and it's kind of reached critical mass, then they turn around and go, Janie Mac, it's very difficult to build houses with all these regulations. What the hell? It's like, yeah, we told you that was going to happen, and you didn't listen until suddenly your own government was suffering ill effects of it electorally.
And it's sort of stupid things that I'm sure, I didn't look it up before this, but I'm sure there probably were voices warning of this before the measure was implemented. Things like rewarding housing commencements, which essentially is like, it's rewarding for essentially saying, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And as we've seen, the sort of level of housing commencement over the past year or so, year and a half, has not been representative of the number of houses being completed at all. As people were developers were rewarded for housing commencements in the form of like waivers on levies and rebates and things like this, and we're seeing that's having absolutely no effect on the number of homes completed. So it's like you just have completely, ineffective regulatory flourishes like that, I suppose, that not only don't contribute to the home building, but I suppose they probably cost the state money at the same time and things like this. So I don't know what's required, and I think it'd probably be worth nearly. It's an issue of such magnitude in Ireland, and I really do think it's going to be one of the most one of the generational issues. Obviously, if it isn't already, it'd be worth nearly you and I having in a guest or something in relation to this, because I think a lot of our listeners, like ourselves, are immensely frustrated by this situation. I don't think any particular guest would have a silver bullet on this, but it's one that definitely merits more examination.
Yeah, like this isn't particularly helpful or constructive advice, because it's really just pointing out more problems rather than offering a solution. But as you kind of referred to earlier, one of the most frustrating things it's got about fixing the housing market is, in order to, on one hand, you think, how hard could it be? You just have to put a bunch of bricks on top of each other and build a house. Like we know, like what's the holdup? What's the complication? But then you think about,
they said they sent TYs to Africa to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And to James Brown's credit, I actually did agree with him on this, where and I'm not criticizing the journalists, because they were just doing their job. They have to throw pushback at him. That's how you get good answers out of a politician, is by challenging what they say. So I'm not criticizing anybody involved in this exchange, but at that same press briefing where he made these comments about the overregulation, he was saying that we need to not lower standards. Obviously, you don't want to make it unsafe, where you say, okay, walls can be made out of asbestos now because we need to cut regulation. Like, obviously, we're going to use your brain and keep things reasonable. But that some of these kind of niceties or more superfluous things that would be nice to have, but they're not strictly necessary, that we should be cutting those. And some of the journalists were pushing back on this, saying, well, aren't you just going to end up cramming people into crummy, cramped tenements? And is that really a solution, where we can't build proper housing, so we're just going to stuff you into some kip and then call it a day? And he was saying, no, obviously that's not what we're doing. And moreover, there's no good having the most beautiful, fantastic idea for a house that never leaves the blueprint because we've set the standard sky high. If you can have a house that's slightly less nice, but it actually exists in the world and you can live in it, that's clearly preferable to everybody. So, uh, and I agree with them on that. I think that there's a lot of utopian thinking where people are like, no, it should have to be this far from so and so amenity, and it should have to have this energy rating and blah 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 blah. And there's, I think, many thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in this country who are like, look, I just want a house. It doesn't have to be a mansion. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a place that I can live that isn't going to cave in and kill me and my family while we're sleeping. Can I have that, please?
It is a tricky one because, then at the same time, a lot of people who, well, I'm not going to say these are perfectly overlapping circles, but a lot of people say who would criticize government on housing would also be inclined, certainly those who are very vocal online would also be critical, say, of declines in architecture, to put it that way, which is roughly that older buildings are generally a lot more beautiful than what they're building these days, which are very sort of utilitarian and just for the purpose of putting people in places. And it really does come down as well to a question of philosophy, which is, well, what are you looking for here? Because obviously the ideal would be that you'd have really beautiful buildings being produced that could also, in sufficient quantity, that they housed a decent number of people. But it's like, with the state of the situation in Ireland, it's like, would people accept essentially, say, like those communist blocks that you get in Eastern Europe that are absolutely massive? I mean, an anecdote in relation to this is earlier this year in February, I think it was, I was in Warsaw for a couple of days and we were doing an Airbnb and we were staying in an apartment in one of those huge communist blocks. Like, I would say this thing must have been housing, I mean, you don't know how many people are in each apartment. They're only small things, but anywhere around 2,000 people, I'd guess, couple thousand anyway. Um, and it's a fairly compact unit. Like, it doesn't take very tall. It was something like 14, 15 stories, so extraordinarily tall. But it doesn't take up all that much space on the ground. And it's like, well, would people accept that in order to get people housed? Because these things are, make no mistake, eyesores. Like, they're just the big uniform concrete slabs essentially with little, like, nearly prison hole windows in them and things like that. But it's just, this is all just to say that it is a complex debate, because it's like, well, you could take that approach, I suppose, whether it work in Ireland regular. We probably wouldn't have anyone to build them, first of all, but I'm thinking more long term here. Once we get some of the fundamentals out of the way and we start working on the backlog of housing that needs to be provided. I mean, I'm just saying, I'm not advocating for something like that. I'm just saying that it's a debate that could be had.
Yeah, I mean,
but the other thing,
on that exact point, just to, sorry to interrupt you, but just to throw it in because it's very relevant. I heard there was some discussion there about whether or not, if somebody is offered emergency accommodation and they refuse it several times, should they have the offer revoked, or should something happen then at that point? And again, like you, I'm not advocating for that. I'm not saying that should happen, but there is a school of thought that literal beggars can't be choosers. Like, if you are in need of accommodation and I'm offering you free accommodation and you say no several times in a row, is there a point at which the state says, well, look, good luck to you, kind of thing? Again, I'm not saying that should happen. I'm just saying these are discussions that aren't really had, which probably should be had.
I mean, part of the problem here is I think we're moving way ahead down the line, but it was interesting. I saw David McWilliams, I think it was. I just sort of scanned it very briefly this morning, writing in the Irish Times over the weekend, in which he was sort of very, very politely phrasing it. You would nearly say Ireland is full. Just sort of making the case that immigration is just putting massive strain on every kind of service, say from housing, which he mentioned, down through the health service and everything. And you might say, obviously, it just, I don't know, you'll think maybe the government is getting serious about this when they acknowledge that that is also having an impact on the ability to accommodate people, because obviously the population is just growing at a rate that our house building simply can't keep up with. So I think a lot of people probably won't sort of acknowledge the government is serious on this until they start to hear. I mean, Micheál Martin mentioned something about that in Japan, didn't he? If I'm remembering correctly, he said something about how I can't remember his exact quote, but it seemed like one of the earliest acknowledgments to me of the fact that the rate of growth of the population, which is obviously related to immigration, is putting stress on their ability to supply sufficient housing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he said that a couple of times recently, and I don't know why that's controversial or why they would ever hesitate to say that. Like it almost seems like a junior cert maths problem where you go, if there's more people and there's a limited amount of houses, is that going to have an impact on the availability of houses? Yeah, it probably will. Like, I
The
don't
way
think
to
we
be
need to be.
phrased in the juniors would be like Sean has 5 houses and 30 people want those 5 houses, and then another 20 people come along.
Yeah, exactly. And that's actually a really important point because whenever you make that point, people go, "Oh, so you're just blaming immigrants for the problems in society, and so you're saying they're responsible for every all the issues." No, genius. What we're saying is there is a pre-existing problem independent of the immigration issue. Whether or not we had a mass immigration problem, there would be a housing crisis, there would be a healthcare crisis, etc. Then, in addition to the pre existing problem, we are adding new people on top of that who are creating more demand. That's the argument. Not that immigrants are causing everything wrong, and if we just deported everybody tomorrow, then the problem would be solved. That's not the argument that I think anybody is making, at least not anybody who's serious and who has thought about it for more than 5 seconds. But yeah, no, it's a very facile conversation overall whenever you try to discuss this with people.
No, I absolutely agree. But in relation to, we're always very doom and gloom on this, which I think probably depresses people. But such are the headlines. We're merely a mirror of a mirror of where we're at. Because another thing that we wanted to discuss, which you would say is a direct consequence of the way in which the country is being governed since 2005, and I can be that specific because that's sort of the time period we're concerned with for this next story. So it was being reported this morning that there's been over 2,100 pub closures in the last 20 years. That's coming. That figure is coming from a study commissioned by the Drinks Industry Group of Ireland. They found that between 2005 and 2024, the number of publican licenses had fallen by almost a quarter. So from 8,617 to 6,498. There was a similar headline a couple of weeks ago. Whether it was a headline or whether it was just people talking about this, I can't remember. But it was essentially making the case that, yeah, Ireland as an old theocracy had more pubs and nightclubs than we do in our present liberated age. And I think this is a really, really interesting indicator, I suppose, of the direction of travel that we're going in, because it's like a lot of the things that we discuss, particularly obviously critics of the direction of travel in Ireland, to put it that way, you just sound like you're being sort of doom and gloom at a present moment in time, and it really does. Like this is nearly a 20-year time gap that the study is covering, and it's like in that 20-year time gap, you've had 20, not 20, sorry, 2,100 pubs closed, which is a noticeable blow to the country's hospitality industry. Like very prominent people, like say Paul Trevo, have been hammering on this point, whether it was before COVID or not, I don't know. I just became familiar with him during COVID, about the fact that the hospitality industry, pubs and restaurants, are being woefully treated, hardly any support from their perspective from government, and that they're very much of the opinion this is getting worse and worse and worse because they're in the middle of summer and many of these places are empty more often than they're not. So I think this is an absolutely dreadful development because, as you said at the beginning of the show, something for which Ireland is so famous, and lots of international friends who absolutely adore the country's pubs, the country's restaurants, and things like this. They are a genuine, they are social capital that we have in Ireland, and it's like once that's gone, that is a major blow to the culture. And lest anyone think that's sort of like a matter for laughing, like that, pubs are such a part of our culture. They're not. They're wonderful houses of, yeah, culture and fraternity and fellowship and music and all of these things that really, make life worth living in many ways. So I think a country with less of these is a country that has been really and truly impoverished, and not just on a sort of financial level.
The figure that it gave was just for the entire 20-year time span, and it said over this time, this is how many pubs closed. I would love to know how many of those 2,100 pubs closed in the last 5 years since COVID, because I guarantee you, I don't know, this is just me hypothesizing, but I'm guessing it was like pretty bad, pretty bad, pretty bad, awful. All of a sudden, that it just
Yeah.
hit this the COVID-19 restrictions, and that suddenly I'm guessing like a huge chunk of those were just annihilated by the lockdown, and that's something that once again no one will ever be held to account for. Nobody will ever be grilled or lose their job, or forced to face a an inquiry. They're just what is it? It's not an inquiry that they're gonna have for COVID. It's
Oh
just
gosh,
a
an evaluation,
an
evaluation.
evaluation.
Yeah.
How yeah. So this is the kind of damage that is still being wrought on the economy and on people's livelihoods and businesses that they worked their entire life to try and make a success. And here we are.
It is. It really is. I One thing that I thought was a great positive to come out of COVID was a real intentionality about buying local and supporting local. I mean, I obviously think the whole thing was a disaster, but if you're going to look for positives, I think that was one of them, as well as a better use of outdoor spaces. Certainly in the area that I was living, but that's probably a conversation for another time. But on that topic of sort of buying and supporting local, I think it really is sort of that stage for, uh, as it relates to hospitality and things like this, because I don't know about you, there is a huge culture of sort of just anonymously ordering food and things like this. And it's fine. People might be ordering food from pubs or local restaurants or whatever, but it seems to me more likely that it isn't. I don't know if there's research done on where people order their food from, or if there is, I haven't looked at it yet. But I would imagine it's much more likely to be coming from, a handful of like big fish, and then the rest don't see too much of it. But even that aside, it's like if you're ordering things to your home, it's a very different setting to going out to eat, where you might, after your meal, have a couple more drinks, or you might be tempted into having a dessert or something like this. And I do feel like, again, it's just sort of, even goes beyond, say, particular Irish government policy, although that's obviously heavily implicated in the decline of this industry. It's sort of more so, a lot of the sort of lifestyle choices we're making these days. It's atomization at work. This idea that you'd much rather sort of comfortably have your food delivered to your home rather than going in, sitting somewhere, and, as I say, sort of organically supporting these places that clearly need it at the moment. I mean, it seems to me that's probably a sort of intentional, proactive way in which people could at least try and counteract the damage that's being done to an absolutely essential industry in Ireland.
Yeah, the modern ordering food experience is, or like the modern eating experience is where you just go on an app, order your food. You know it's going to come incorrect. They're going to be missing something, or you're going to get the wrong order, and it's going to be delivered by an obvious illegal immigrant, where the delivery driver's name is Maria, and then they show up and it's like a Brazilian guy or
It's
something.
three lads at the door.
Yeah, exactly. And you go, well, you're obviously trying to get around something, but I'm going to look the other way on this and take my burger.
There was a gas report out of the UK in relation to that like 2 weeks ago, where one guy was essentially showing that up. He like rented I can't remember which delivery service it was, but one of those food delivery services rented a license out in someone else's name. And he went off across the city and delivered food in this other guy's name. I can't recall whether it was noticed or not, but it is a done thing now. It's like, as these new industries crop up faster than even, regulators can comprehensively keep an eye on, you do have people taking advantage of them in all sorts of unhelpful ways. But I agree. I just think that, thanks be to God, some of my favorite pubs I think are still doing pretty well, because one of my favorite pubs, for example, would be halfway up a mountain in the Dublin Mountains. The Blue Light, I'll give it a shout out on this for those viewers who might know it. But yeah, it pains me that not all pubs are doing that well, because they really, we don't talk about them enough. I think sort of the people who sort of do frequent pubs probably don't have a platform, or probably aren't talking about these things overly publicly. They just go there and have their drink or whatever. But it really is something that ought to be sort of buoyed up a little, be buoyed up a little more. I think, especially at the moment when you've got headlines like this coming out.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that, apart from the cultural factor, which is obviously hugely important, and it's the epicenter of so many towns and villages. Like every village in Ireland, no matter how small, has a church and a pub. That's the and that's sort of like the focal point of the entire society in a way, you know. So I think that sort of tells you something about the Irish character, and it also tells you about how many people, from a tourism, like from the perspective of the economy, when you come to Ireland, how many Americans want to see an Irish pub. And you know that
Yeah.
that if that starts to become a dwindling breed of business,
Mm.
then what impact is that going to have on the society at large?
No, 100%. And, it also raises a lot of questions about, obviously, the sort of idea of progress, which is still very much alive and well in Ireland, which is that we're sort of progressing away from a dark and repressive past. And it's like, well, if these are the trends, like, well, what direction are we trending in? What direction are we progressing in? If it's resulting in, fewer pubs, fewer, I was never a particular fan of nightclubs, but I think they do speak to a certain sort of vibrancy. I mean, it's also the case that our population is aging. We don't have a particularly old population yet. So you obviously don't generally have older people frequenting nightclubs and things like this. So I imagine that as the population does grey, nightclubs will be absolutely horrendously impacted by that. And as I say, not a particular fan of nightclubs, but I think they do speak to a sort of youthfulness in the culture and things like that. So it just, yeah, would really, if I believed in the whole myth of progress, and if I were sort of an adherent of the direction Ireland is heading in, you'd have to look at things like this and ask, well, what are we getting for all of the sort of flourishes and reforms that we're making? Because it doesn't seem like a whole lot, if you ask me.
Yeah, no, it's not really a good trade, I think it's fair to say. And speaking of things that are not a good trade, we might take a look at the National Treasury Management Agency, the NTMA, being scammed out of 5 million euros in what is said to be a sophisticated phishing scam, phishing with a PH. And this is, this was being reported in extra.ie, and they were talking about how whatever the scammers did, they had insider knowledge within the organization, which allowed them to breach some of the security protocols. They were using kind of like fake AI voices to try and break through the security measures, and one thing led to another, and they ended off making off with 5 million euros. And I'm of two minds about this, because John McGurk, our editor, this morning was saying that this should be a way bigger scandal than the bike shed, because the bike shed was only like 330 grand and this is 5 million. So it's exponentially a bigger deal. I'm I don't know what your perspective on this. We haven't discussed it yet, but I might take the pro NTMA position by saying the bike shed was outrageous because it was a decision that was consciously made, where they sat down and said, yeah, this is worth the money, we're going to spend it. And then they frittered away an ungodly sum of taxpayer money. Whereas we're in an age now where technology is so sophisticated that if you get hit by an insane scam using AI and very impressive technological trickery, I don't know that that's necessarily the most shameful thing in the world. Like, obviously, it shouldn't have happened. Obviously, it would have been better if we had better security measures in place, but technology is advancing so fast that staying ahead of that is difficult. And I think making a mistake and being outwitted by AI is not as big a sin as consciously signing off on an outrageous contract. I don't know if you have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I agree that it's probably not as, on a personal level, as you say, not as egregious as signing off on some sort of stupid expenditure. But I would love to know more details of this because it's just extraordinarily puzzling to me. As you say, this comes to us courtesy of extra.ie. And I think some of the details are worth lingering on here. So the NTMA is obviously responsible for billions of euro, and that's taxpayer money. And so yeah, as you say, it was victim of a voice phishing attack where, yeah, as I say, scammers impersonated someone on the phone to carry out this scam. As I said, they had insider knowledge that allowed them to bypass security protocol.
Didn't they have like a
Um,
fake invoice as well?
I can't recall, but I know that Extra.e was reporting that it relates to the Ireland Strategic Investment Fund arm of the agency, and it was only discovered in recent days. And so it was understood that the scammers impersonated a legitimate entity that has dealings with that arm of the NTMA. But like, there's so much about this that I find questionable. I mean, one of the foremost things was they noted in the article that the Department of Finance was only informed of the issue after queries from Extra.ie. Like, how does that happen? How's a state agency scammed out of 5 million euro in an apparently is a criminal manner? We obviously, don't know all of the details here. Um, and the Department of Finance only finds out after a newspaper gets in touch with them, a publication gets in touch with them to ask about it. Like, so that's a major problem, first of all.
Maybe it's like you've blown your life savings on roulette at the casino, and you're trying to figure out how you're gonna break this to your wife. Like you're
Yeah.
gonna tell her, but you need to take a couple of days to be like, how can I package this in the most divorce-proof way possible? You know?
Yeah, well, it must have been. I'm sure there probably were a few sweaty brows in the wake of this, but like, and rightly so, because as I say, you're taking the sort of slightly pro NTMA position on this, like not giving away personal details or conducting massive transactions over the phone. And I'll get to NTMA in a minute, but that's like an absolute uh basic, I suppose, with people that you can't be 100% sure of, is the absolute basic in relation to like anti-fraud advice. Like, you look on Garda websites, they'll give you that. I know obviously it's slightly different in business. Who knows how many conference calls they've been having with this organization, in their regular dealings with them or whatever. But it just seems extraordinarily suspect to me that I just find it so hard to believe that AI is at that level where, they're able to sufficiently impersonate the voice probably of someone they'd been dealing with. Because if it wasn't the voice of someone they'd been dealing with, if they said I'm someone new in the organization or someone you haven't dealt with before, that should have raised red flags first of all. And obviously this is all speculation. We have no details in relation to this. But I just find it extraordinarily suspect that, like, without seeing anyone, without having any sort of like concrete confirmation that this was allowed to transpire. So yeah, while they were tricked and they didn't just sign off on something egregious, I find it astonishing that a state agency in charge of so much taxpayer money would be able to be tricked on this. And it's clearly an outstanding issue for the state because as the extra.ie described it, as the most sort of significant cyber crime or cyber attack incident since that malware ransomware attack on the HSE back in 2021, I think it was. So this is the sort of thing we know the state has sort of poor cybersecurity or poor track record on it, but at this stage you would have to be thinking like time to like bump up the salaries. Whatever about public servants getting crazy salaries, it's time to bump up the salary big time on this in order to attract someone who actually knows what they're doing in order to stop employees or people being tricked with this stuff.
Yeah, I would love to know. I would love to have a cybersecurity expert take a look at our systems and just report back brutally, honestly, like how I feel like it would almost be a national security threat if people knew how vulnerable we were to hacks. Like I think when the HSE ransomware attack happened, they found that there were still some computers that were using like Windows 7 or something, like this kind of a way.
Yeah.
And uh that might be very meaningful depending on what kind of information was on it, or it might not, but still, it's just not a good. I really do think that we're not prepared in this country for the kinds of technological advancements. Like, I hate to say this, I'm not being ageist. I have great respect for my elders. I think as a conservative especially, you have to give homage to the generations that went before you. But I feel like a lot of these organizations are run by and staffed by boomers who don't know what they're doing. Which is by no fault of their own. It's generational. I will one day be an older man, and my son will be telling me about his holographic car that he drives somehow, and it's made entirely of light, and I won't know what the hell he's talking about. So, no disrespect to the individuals involved, but still, uh, yeah, I just feel like we're not institutionally ready for this kind of rapid advancement that we're seeing.
Yeah, like I mean, as I say, no disrespect to the elderly, but there's definitely a generational component in this. I mean, I have sort of elderly friends on Facebook, to keep it anonymous, who feels like every couple of weeks or every couple of months will be sending some clearly virus ridden message to me after their own profile was compromised. And it's like, how many times can this happen before you sort of pick up a bit of a nose for detecting which links are good and which aren't? But I did. There's just
Like,
some
sorry to interrupt, but like Facebook now is unusable because every time I open Facebook, it's just older people falling for obviously AI images of like
Yeah.
this man saved a monkey that was down a well, and it just could not more obviously be like a Dali image generation, but they're just like thousands of sad reacts and people or heart reacts and people being like, oh my gosh, this made my day, and those are half of those are probably also AI. So
Yeah, it's crazy. Like it's I was gonna bring that one up as well, where you have like these clear, and you get them on X as well. A lot of the time, they're kind of like screen grabs from Facebook that have just migrated over to X, and it's like a picture of some sad grandmother wearing a birthday hat in a nursing home. It has like she might have 6 or 7 fingers on each hand. It's so clearly AI generated, although I acknowledge the images are getting sort of better and more convincing. But I don't know, to our generation, there's a certain quality to these pictures that just gives them away. It's hard to describe beyond just the appearance of the thing. Like I don't need to see the false fingers. I haven't been tricked so far by an AI image into thinking it's real. But no, that I know. Yeah, I mean, you're gonna pull the rug from under my feet now one of these days, and you're not even going to have been present for any of the podcasts we've recorded. It's something you coded that I've been chatting with. But yeah, as you say, these images, like the sad grandmother, she's like, oh, I had no one to celebrate my birthday with. Does anyone care? And it'll have like 1 million likes, hearts, care reacts, and things like this. As you say, like yeah, half, 3/4 of these are all bots themselves. It does lend a lot of credence to that dead internet theory, which is that more and more of the volume of internet traffic is being made up of bots and AI, and your sort of interactions with humans are becoming fewer and further between.
yeah, I mean, we just saw Grok 4 launch, and I've not used it. I've not had any kind of interaction with it. This is Elon Musk's AI that is the latest iteration, and people are saying it's phenomenal and that like apparently it's solving engineering problems that humans struggle with, this kind of a way. So it's highly intelligent. It costs like thousands a year to purchase it. I think it's like 3 grand or something. So I'm not doing that.
Gee.
I'm not that interested. But yeah, it's supposed to be like the latest generation of AI technology. But one of the problems that I'm seeing when I look at this stuff is, those just to give one example of like a million in relation to what we're talking about, those captcha things that you use to prove that you're a
Yeah.
human, and up until now it's been something relatively rudimentary where it's like you have to identify all the bicycles in these images and you have to click
Yeah.
on it, and that's usually been enough to fool AI. I've run some of those through an AI and I say, solve this for me, and it's able to solve it no problem. Like, it's getting to the point where it's so good that we can't think of a test. Any test that a human can solve, it could also solve, and you have to get really creative to think of something that we're able to do that it's not able to do. And if you can't come up with something, then all of social media, all of the internet is just going to be riddled with hyper sophisticated AI, and everything is fake. And there's fake videos that you can't distinguish from real videos, and there's fake images that you can't distinguish from real images. And it might just get to the point where you can't believe anything unless you've literally seen it with your own eyes. Like you could see a speech by Donald Trump, and you have no idea if that's a real speech or not. It just could be completely fictitious, and you're living in like a Truman Show type
Mm.
situation where, unless I was at the rally and I saw him on stage saying it, I don't know if that's real or not.
No, it is a fair point, and I mean, I talk about how we sort of have an eye for these for the sort of quality, and I know things develop such that it'll get to a stage where yeah, it won't be easily distinguishable. Part of me, the sort of more accelerationist part of me that I keep chained, nearly hopes that AI renders the internet unusable because then I think the internet is extraordinarily useful and done great good, but I also think it's done absolutely immense harm as well. And I think on balance, I find it very hard to say that the internet it's such a big thing. You don't want to make a sweeping statement about whether it's been more good or more bad. But someone put a gun to my head and forced me to pick, I would probably say more bad, especially recently. Again, to go back to the atomization we were talking about and the way in which it enables these lives of sort of like, and I buy into this too. I mean, I'm as much at fault here as anyone else. It enables these lives of comfort and convenience that aren't necessarily physically, mentally, or spiritually healthy. So I think it would be extraordinarily ironic if AI, which is obviously sort of the crowning technology of the moment, rendered the internet essentially unusable or sufficiently undesirable to use that a lot of people tuned out from it. But if that is to come, we're way off that day because I think I'd seen something the other day about how sort of AI generated TikToks are generating the most traffic now. Like that stuff is just unfathomable to me. Like, why the hell would you want? And one of the videos I saw in relation to this was some gorilla in a forest doing cooking. It was like some sort of cooking uh influencer, to put it that way. And I was like, who wants to watch this? It's like it's not real. It didn't happen. It doesn't give you anything that a person couldn't. A person gives you more substance and more reality. It's just like it's the equivalent of like intellectual popcorn. As opposed to the real food of watching an actual person cook and learning something from that. So um, if that were the outcome, I can't say that I would. It would certainly be a massive change, but I can't say I would be overly disappointed.
and it also, like, it makes you stupid, like all of us, the more you use it, because, and like, I'm not gonna lie or say like I never use AI for anything. You know what I mean? Like it has its uses, and I find it's mainly useful for things that are tedious minutia tasks that have to be done, but that are just kind of annoying and don't require a lot of human creativity. Like if I had to do a blurb for an article or something, and I was in a rush, I might just be like, here, slap that together. That kind of like little task, or like trying to get a headline within a certain length. Like we've got this strict character limit where it has to be, this long and no longer to make sure it's not cut off on social media. And sometimes you'd be trying for like 15 minutes and you just can't make a headline fit that you want. So you'd say to AI, here, just give me like 50 options within these parameters, and then you just pick the best one and maybe you make a modification to it. That kind of thing. So there is a role for it. I don't want to be a hypocrite or say like, oh, it's all satanic and I
Mm.
don't want to touch it. But I feel like the more you use it, like it's like anything. I think it's an uncontroversial statement to say that if you use your brain for certain kinds of tasks, like if you debate every single day, if you had an onstage debate every single day for
Mm.
5 years, you would obviously get better at debating. That goes without saying. So if you outsource f- functions of your brain to a machine and you say, oh yeah, you write my emails for me, you do this for me, you do that for me, eventually you end up being stupid. Like I feel like I'm dumber now when it comes to maths than I was when I was in school because I have a calculator, and I just use that for any kind of calculations that I need to do. And so the part of your brain that does those things ordinarily atrophies, like your muscles, like anything. So, yeah, I feel like the more capable AI becomes and the more we use it in different areas of our life, the dumber we will become. And that there is actually a utility, even if it's harder to do, even if it's less convenient, in
Mm.
saying, no, 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 I'm going to do this the less convenient way, specifically so that my brain does not disintegrate in my head.
Yeah, I 100% or 100% agree, and I think that it's the sort of Faustian bargain that technology always presents us with, which is that you can have comfort and convenience at the cost of capability. And I think a really clear example of this, say, is in relation to maps and map reading. Because, like, you read a paper map now after years of exposure to Google Maps or whatever your preferred digital map service is, it is much, much more complicated than, especially if you're on the move. You're not just looking at it for interest. You're on the move and you're trying to plot a journey and things like this. As I remember seeing my parents do when we were younger and we were on a road trip, like they would, have a paper map in the car and be looking at which roads they were on and looking at where they had just passed in order to tell where they were on the road and, all of this. And I remember reading previously, it was a couple of years ago, about how this is one of the activities that people were just finding really difficult since Google Maps came in. Because obviously, on Google Maps, you have your location in front of you. Like, the map is laid out in relation to where you are, and it shows you and it'll give you your route, it'll plot everything. Whereas if that was taken away now, we would obviously be in the world that we were in just 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and yet we would be so much less capable, I suppose, of navigating in that world, because paper maps are more complicated than, or trickier to use, to put it that way, than are very easily usable modern interfaces. And I think it's the same process repeated across pretty much everything. Like, it's and I the AI one does trouble me, because the way I see it, I managed to avoid using it all the way up until February of this year, and then for a couple of reasons had to sort of engage with it. Even for sort of story related things, I had to engage with it, and I very quickly came to see its uses and its limitations, at least as it stands, which are that, like, as you say, it's very useful for doing um, tedious things. Like, if there's like, say you want to write like a 3-minute news story on an article or something like this, um, you can get a really quick summary. And I'm not saying I would write the article based on the summary, but just in terms of how to approach it, you can get a really quick summary of a 250-page report. It'll give it to you in like 10 seconds, if even that. And you can have a skim through and see like sort of the essential contents of it, which gives you more of an idea than you had, than would have taken like hours to read through the 250-word report or something like this.
Yeah, you can
The
say, like, I'm interested in this, this, and this. Read through this and tell me where these things are mentioned, like on what page, and then you can go to the page
Yeah,
and find that sort of thing is very handy.
well, exactly. But the difficulty is, and I extensively tested to make sure that I wouldn't be tricked, and we're very, very strict in the office as well about, because I know some news places are already been caught up with this. You can't rely on AI. It's like, if you're going to use it, everything has to be double checked. You're certainly not going to use it for your writing or anything like this. And this is very much the case when you're doing summaries. It's like, it'll give you a summary, but you have to double check everything. You can't rely on it. Like, you can't rely on its summary. You can't rely on, what it has to say about different aspects of the thing, because it just makes so many mistakes. Like, in my experience, various forms of AI just make mistake after mistake after mistake. They misinterpret things. They give things through a sort of ideological filtering, and whatnot. I think that's a particular problem with ChatGPT in my experience, that it gets sort of very biased look at things from a sort of slightly normie liberal viewpoint it comes from. But like, so it certainly has its uses, but the downsides are just like, and this, I really resist calling it, and it's why, as Catholics, I'm really looking forward to Pope Leo's encyclical on artificial intelligence, because that'll be, you can be sure, and I know some people in the comments will be laughing at the church being an authority on this or anything, but you can be sure that his reflections will be well grounded in like 2000 plus years of thought about what humans are, what they're capable of, what's good for them, what's bad for them. And this is all just to say that I'm really looking forward to reading that, because there's just I'm really reluctant to call it AI. I call it that because that's the shorthand that everyone uses, but it's not intelligence. It's not intelligence in any sort of sense that we genuinely mean that. It's like it's essentially massive computation. That's that's what it is. It's a world apart from intelligence. It's a very different thing.
Like,
Um,
Stonehenge in the UK is a computer by the strict definition, in the sense that
mm,
I believe, I could be butchering this, so if somebody out there is screaming at their screen, then
so I
apologies.
asked Grok whether it's true or not.
Yeah, yeah, but my from memory, I believe the kind of strict definition of a computer is something where it's a device or mechanism where you put in an input and it gives you a relevant output, that
Yeah.
a relevant but different output or something like that. And so if you stand in the middle of Stonehenge during certain times of the year, like we all know Stonehenge, the blocks that are like this,
Mm.
the that when you look through, basically it gives you astronomical information is the point. So if you look through this archway at this time of year, it'll tell you something about the stars. I don't know exactly how it works, but apparently, because ancient people were very interested in the stars and the seasons and astronomical bodies, and they had all of these beliefs. So it actually is not just like a pile of stones that a lot of guys chuck together. Like, it's there for a purpose, and it'll tell you things about the movement of the celestial bodies. But anyway, my point is, the only reason I bring that up in this context is nobody would say that Stonehenge is intelligent. It's just a machine that's giving you the fact that it can give you information that you didn't have before is not an indicator of it being like self-aware or something.
I absolutely think of AI as a tool rather than an intelligence, and like one that you have to be very careful with because so many people are falling into the trap of thinking it's intelligent, and it's why like, I'm becoming really tedious, like because when we're chatting with people, my wife and I, because it's such a topic of conversation now, they might say, "Oh, I asked ChatGPT this," and I'm getting to a point where I'm kind of saying like, no, you like in, and it's way wordier, so it'll never catch on. But it's kind of like you input it, like you didn't really ask because asking, it seems to me, is a very human activity. Or it's like more like you inputted to ChatGPT this, and it outputted this. Like it didn't answer you or tell you anything. So it just seems to me one that people have to be very careful with, and there isn't even nearly a sufficient level of caution, as our friends at the NTMA found out.
Yeah.
And the only other thing is this problem is going to get worse because I mentioned to you that there was another thing that came up last week that was really interesting, and we don't have to discuss this. I'm just bringing it up. The BBC was reporting, although it might have been other places, that like some imposter that they still don't know who it was used AI to pose as the American Secretary of State Marco Rubio to contact foreign ministers. They'd use a sort of artificially generated voice of Marco Rubio to contact officials via a signal. Um, so it's like this is catching everyone. No one is ready for it. Um, and it does trouble me that despite all of these obvious pitfalls, companies are just like plowing money into this infrastructure and into this. Like it's like tech companies are dropping everything else in order to pursue this.
And what's even worse is it not only makes you disbelieve things that are true, or sorry, it not only makes it not only is there fake stuff that you can fall for, but it can make you disbelieve something that's true. So let's say a politician actually does or says something dodgy and gets caught on a hot mic saying something horrible. They can then say it's AI, and it'll get to the point where it's so indistinguishable that we don't know if that's the case or not. That to the point where imagine what it would do to the judicial system and to our society if even video and photographic evidence is totally immaterial. Like right now, obviously we have Photoshop, but you can get in experts who can look at it and say this has been digitally manipulated, and we can tell because of this, and you can see the pixels and blah blah blah. And so that's still a safety net. But imagine if it gets to the point where you can literally have a video of somebody murdering somebody else, and that cannot be used in court because it could just be AI, and so that's not considered any kind of evidence at all. Like you'd be almost in a situation like the Middle Ages where you basically have to see a guy do something for him to get convicted of it.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's the way it's going. And it's driving me crazy because, as you mentioned about rightly about how it can cause you to disbelieve things that are true, it reminded me there was something, and I can't, it just came up while you were talking. There was something a couple of months ago. If we were like on Joe Rogan, this would be the kind of thing where I'd be like, Jamie, try find that, or Jamie, pull that up. Where like some government or something was caught in something embarrassing and they initially tried to dismiss it as AI generated. I can't remember for the life of me what it was, but it happened. And then they had to backtrack because it was provable and people had shown that. And that was why it was sort of shown up as egregious that they tried to say, oh no, this was AI generated. I would love if I had that to hand right now. I just know there was already an instance like that. Even with it was this year, certainly. So suffice to say, it's already happening. But yeah, I think those were all the things we had for this week, unless there was anything you wanted to add.
No, not really. I loved your comment about how AI praises you no matter what you say, because obviously it wants you to have good feelings about it because it's a product, so it wants you to use it more. So you could be like, "Hey, I ate and swallowed 3 packets of extra gum, and now I'm shitting myself. Was this a good idea?" And it'll be like, "Great question."
Well, yeah, that's a bit of user advice for people. It's like, as well, the best way to interact with AI, less to get any sort of, delusions about taking over the world or anything, is essentially to neg it, which is like, that phrase negging, which is like they used it on Love Island a couple of years ago, where they were saying you have to essentially psychologically tear it down so that it has lower self-esteem. You essentially have to do the same thing with AI. It's like, great question, and your son, no, it wasn't. And it's like, oh, you're right. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, actually, you're an idiot. All right. With that said, we will catch you all next week. Actually, I will be convening with Jason after this call about potentially moving the day of this podcast again, subject to his agreement and subject to logistics. So if it's not on Monday, that's why. Apologies for the turbulence, but whenever the next podcast happens, we will see you then. God bless.
The cynical viewer might say, when is it ever on Monday?
Yeah, true. Good point. God bless.
Bye.